August 17, 1943. Aero 4:30 hours, East Anglia, England. The darkness of Thorpe Abbott's airfield was shattered by the rumble of engines and the shouts of ground crews preparing for the mission. Inside Nissen huts across the base, men were already awake, many having never slept at all. They knew what was coming. Today's target, the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, deep in the heart of Germany. Staff Sergeant Robert Morgan, ball turret gunner with the 91st Bomb Group, sat on his bunk writing what might be his last letter home. Around him, 9 other men prepared for a mission that would take them 500 miles into enemy territory, through waves of German fighters and fields of anti-aircraft fire so dense you could supposedly walk on it. They would fly at 25,000 feet, where the temperature reached 50 degrees below zero, where the air was too thin to breathe without oxygen, where a single mistake meant death for 10 men. This is the story of the B-17 bomber crews who fought America's air war over Germany. Not fighter pilots dueling for glory, but ordinary men crammed into flying fortresses, grinding through missions day after day until they completed 25 sorties or died trying. The statistics were brutal. In 1943, the life expectancy of a B-17 crew over Germany was 11 missions. This story reveals what it was really like to fight the war at 25,000 feet, where courage was measured not in split-second decisions but in hours of sustained terror. A B-17 flying fortress required 10 men to operate, not a pilot and co-pilots, but 10 specialists, each essential to survival. Understanding their roles reveals the complexity of strategic bombing and why crew coordination meant the difference between returning home and becoming another statistic. The pilot, typically a first lieutenant or captain, commanded the aircraft and crew. He sat in the left seat, flying the massive bomber through flak and fighter attacks while maintaining formation position. Formation discipline was everything in bomber operations. Break formation, and you became easy prey for German fighters. Lieutenant Robert Morgan of Memphis. Belle fame described the responsibility. You're not just flying your aircraft. You're responsible for 9 other lives, for a $250,000 bomber, for hitting the target so other crews don't have to come back tomorrow. Every decision you make affects whether 10 families receive telegrams. The co-pilot occupied the right seat, managing engine settings, monitoring fuel consumption, and backing up the pilot. In combat, he also served as the primary communicator with the formation leader and helped scan for enemy fighters. Second lieutenant casualties were staggering because co-pilots often took over when pilots were killed or wounded, flying damaged bombers home with minimal experience. The bombardier sat in the plexiglass nose, the most exposed position on the aircraft. His job was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Guide the aircraft to the target, acquire the aiming point through the Norden bomb site, and drop bombs accurately while German fighters attacked from head-on and flak exploded around the nose. Lieutenant Howard Snyder, bombardier with the 306th Bomb Group, recalled, "You're sitting in a greenhouse made of plexiglass and aluminum. Fighters are coming straight at you with cannon blazing. Flak is bursting all around. And you have to ignore all of it. Keep your eye on the bomb site, make tiny corrections, and pickle the bombs at exactly the right moment. Your hands are shaking, your heart is pounding, but the crosshairs have to stay steady." The navigator sat beside the bombardier in the nose, responsible for guiding the aircraft across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Without GPS or modern navigation aids, he used dead reckoning, pilotage, and celestial navigation to find targets, often obscured by clouds and smoke. Getting lost over Germany meant flying alone, without the protection of the formation, almost certainly fatal. Technical Sergeant Eugene Morrow, navigator with the 379th Bomb Group, described the pressure. "If I make a mistake, we could miss the target entirely, wasting the mission. Worse, we could get separated from the formation and picked off by fighters. Every calculation has to be perfect, done in a freezing aircraft, wearing bulky gloves, while the plane is bouncing through turbulence and flak." The flight engineer, typically a technical sergeant, stood behind the pilots monitoring engine instruments, managing fuel transfer, and serving as top turret gunner. He was the mechanical expert, troubleshooting problems in flight and making critical decisions about damaged engines. Staff Sergeant Forrest Vosler, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions as radio operator with the 303rd Bomb Group, explained the flight engineer's role. He knows every system on the aircraft. When an engine is hit, he's calculating whether we can make it home on 3. When fuel lines are damaged, he's figuring out which tanks to use, and all while firing at attacking fighters from the top turret. The radio operator sat in the radio room behind the bomb bay, managing communications with base and other aircraft. He also manned one of the waist guns during combat, making him both technician and gunner. The ball turret gunner occupied the most terrifying position, a rotating sphere mounted on the aircraft's belly, barely large enough for a man. Staff Sergeant Alan McGee, who survived a 22,000-foot fall after his ball turret was shot away, described it. You're curled up in a plexiglass ball hanging below the aircraft. You can see the ground 5 miles down between your feet. You're completely exposed. If the aircraft is badly damaged, you can't get out. You just ride it down. The 2 waist gunners stood at open windows on each side of the fuselage, manning 50 caliber machine guns. At altitude, the wind screaming through those windows dropped the temperature to unbearable levels. Frostbite was common. So was getting blown out of the aircraft if not properly secured. The tail gunner sat in the most isolated position, alone in the tail section, defending against fighters attacking from behind, the most common angle of attack. Communication with the rest of the crew was limited. Loneliness and vulnerability defined the position. These 10 men trained together for months before entering combat. They learned each other's voices, habits, and capabilities. They had to trust each other completely because survival depended on every man doing his job under conditions that tested human endurance to its limit. The mission day began before dawn with a knock on the barracks door. An operations sergeant would enter, shining a flashlight on crew lists. Morgan crew, briefing at 500. No other information. Just the knowledge that today you flew into hell. The mess hall served the traditional mission breakfast. Real eggs, bacon, toast, coffee. Fresh eggs were reserved for combat crews on mission days, a small luxury before possible death. Many men couldn't eat, their stomachs tight with anxiety. Others ate everything, uncertain when they'd eat again. Technical Sergeant Michael Aruth, tail gunner with the 388th Bomb Group, remembered. You'd look around that mess hall, seeing which crews were eating. Those faces. Some were on their first mission, terrified but trying not to show it. Others were old hands on their 20th or 24th mission, so close to completing their tour they could taste it. We all knew the statistics. Maybe 3 crews in that room wouldn't come back today. The briefing room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Crews sat together, officers in front, enlisted men behind. The walls were covered with maps, aircraft profiles, and grim reminders. Photos of crashed bombers, recognition charts for German fighters, flak maps showing anti-aircraft concentrations. When the commanding officer entered, everyone stood. Then the moment of truth. The curtain pulled back from the wall map, revealing the red ribbons stretching from England deep into Germany. Groans or silence, depending on the target. Everyone knew which targets were heavily defended. Colonel Curtis LeMay, commanding the 305th Bomb Group and later architect of the strategic bombing campaign, would brief missions with brutal honesty. Gentlemen, today's target is Schweinfurt, ball-bearing production, critical to the German war machine. It's also defended by 200 flak guns and within range of multiple fighter bases. We expect heavy opposition. Formation discipline is mandatory. Stay in formation no matter what. Stragglers don't survive. The intelligence officer detailed the route, enemy fighter bases, flak concentrations, and expected opposition, then weather, altitude, bomb load, fuel load. The briefing could last an hour, every detail critical. Lieutenant John Wynant, pilot with the 92nd Bomb Group, described the atmosphere. You're listening to them describe what you're about to fly through, and your mind is calculating survival odds. How many fighters? How much flak? How far into Germany? Are we hitting a heavily defended target? Every factor affects your chances of coming home. After the main briefing, crews split for specialized briefings. Pilots and co-pilots discussed formation positions, speeds, altitudes. Bombardiers reviewed target photos and aiming points. Navigators coordinated routes and checkpoints. Gunners reviewed fighter tactics and recognition. Then the chaplain. Many crews, regardless of religious background, attended services before missions. Father Benedict Abel, chaplain for the 91st Bomb Group, gave blessings to hundreds of crews. I never promised them they'd come back. I promised that God would be with them whatever happened. Some men prayed for survival, others prayed for courage. All of them faced death, and they faced it with more dignity than I could comprehend. After briefing, crews assembled their equipment. Flight gear for high-altitude bombing missions was complex and essential. Failure of any single component could be fatal. The leather flight suit went on first, followed by heated undergarments connected to the aircraft's electrical system. At 25,000 feet, temperatures reached 50 below zero. Without heating, frostbite could destroy fingers, toes, ears, and noses in minutes. Staff Sergeant Walter Truemper, navigator who posthumously received the Medal of Honor, explained, "You're dressing for extreme cold and possible combat damage. Heavy flight suits, heated gear, flak vest, parachute harness. You're carrying maybe 60 pounds of equipment before you even get to the aircraft. If you have to bail out, you're shedding gear while falling through space." The flak vest weighed 20 pounds. Crude armor plates sewn into canvas. They could stop shrapnel, but not direct hits. Crews learned to sit on their flak vests for additional protection against ground fire coming from below. Oxygen masks were checked obsessively. Above 10,000 feet, oxygen was mandatory. Mask failure meant unconsciousness in minutes, death shortly after. Each crew member carried a bailout bottle, a small oxygen cylinder for emergency use if the main system failed. The parachute harness went on next. Chest pack clipped to the front. Many crews preferred chest packs to backpacks because they could remove them in the cramped aircraft. The downside, in an emergency, you had to locate and clip on your chest pack before bailing out. Weapons varied by position. Officers carried .45 caliber pistols. Enlisted men often carried .45s or .38 revolvers. In addition, many crew members carried knives, survival gear, escape kits with maps and currency, and personal items they considered lucky. Technical Sergeant Thomas Dye, ball turret gunner with the 303rd Bomb Group, described his pre-mission ritual. "I'd check my guns personally, clean them, load them, test the turret rotation. Some guys thought I was superstitious, but I'd seen what happened when guns jammed or turrets froze. You're in a fight for your life and your equipment has to work perfectly." The truck ride to the hard stand where the aircraft waited was quiet. Some men joked nervously. Others sat in silence, smoking, staring at nothing. They were preparing mentally for what was coming. The B-17 Flying Fortress was an impressive sight on the ground. 4 Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower, wingspan of 103 feet, length of 74 feet, empty weight of 36,000 pounds, loaded for combat 65,000 pounds or more. It was the largest aircraft most crew members had ever seen. Ground crews had worked through the night preparing the bombers. Each aircraft required hours of maintenance after every mission. Engines were serviced, hydraulic systems checked, oxygen systems tested, ammunition loaded, 6,000 rounds of .50 caliber for the 13 machine gun standard on late-model B-17Gs. The bomb load varied by target distance and expected opposition. For deep penetration missions, fuel took priority over bombs. A typical load for Schweinfurt: 12 500-pound general-purpose bombs, 6,000 pounds of high explosive. Staff Sergeant Robert Hughes, ground crew chief for a B-17 named Hell's Angels, described the preparation. "We treated those aircraft like they were our own. Every rivet, every bolt, every wire had to be perfect because our friends were flying them into combat. I'd personally check everything twice. When I handed the aircraft over to the pilot, I wanted him to know it was as safe as we could make it. Engine start was a carefully choreographed procedure. The pilot would signal the ground crew. Energizer! The external power unit would engage. Then, clear 3, signaling the number 3 engine was starting. The massive propeller would rotate slowly as the electric starter engaged. A cough of smoke, then the roar as the engine caught, the propeller becoming a blur. One by one, all 4 engines started. The aircraft would shake and vibrate as power flowed through the airframe. The sound was overwhelming. 4 massive radial engines at idle produced a deep thunder that could be heard for miles. Lieutenant Robert Morgan described the sensation. When all 4 engines are running and you're sitting in that left seat, you feel the power. This is a serious machine, built for war. Everything about it is purposeful. But you also feel the weight, the complexity, the vulnerability. You're about to fly this beast into the most heavily defended airspace in the world. Takeoff with a fully loaded B-17 was a test of pilot skill and nerve. The bomber was so heavy that it used every foot of runway. Pilots calculated weight, wind, temperature, and runway length. Errors were fatal. The bombers took off individually, typically at 30-second intervals. With dozens of aircraft launching, the process took over an hour. Each crew watched the aircraft ahead, praying it would clear the trees at the runway's end. Lieutenant James Stewart, the Hollywood actor who flew B-24 Liberators, but whose experiences paralleled B-17 crews, described takeoff. You're at maximum weight, maybe over maximum weight. You release brakes and advance throttles to full power. The aircraft accelerates slowly, reluctantly. You're using the entire runway. The co-pilot is calling speeds. The trees at the end are getting closer. You reach takeoff speed and pull back gently. The aircraft wants to fly, but it's so heavy. Finally, you feel it lift. You're airborne, barely, climbing slowly. One engine failure now means a crash. Once airborne, the real challenge began. Assembly. Dozens of bombers from multiple squadrons had to form into precise formations before heading to the target. This required flying intricate patterns over England for up to 2 hours. Each group had an assigned assembly ship, often a war-weary B-17 painted in distinctive colors. Bombers would orbit the assembly ship, joining the formation in their assigned positions. Lead aircraft fired colored flares to identify themselves. The formations were precisely structured. A combat box typically consisted of 18 to 21 aircraft arranged in staggered altitude layers. Lead squadron at medium altitude, high squadron 1,000 feet above, low squadron 1,000 feet below. This arrangement maximized defensive firepower while allowing bombardiers to drop together. Technical Sergeant Leonard Weiss, radio operator with the 381st Bomb Group, described formation assembly. Dozens of bombers circling over England in varying visibility, trying to find their assigned positions. Near misses were common. Collisions happened. I saw 2 bombers hit during assembly, killing 20 men before the mission even started. And we're doing this in full combat load, heavy, slow, vulnerable. The assembled formations would then join the bomber stream, sometimes over 300 bombers in a column stretching 100 miles. The stream would set course for the coast, climbing to operational altitude. This was the last time crews would feel relatively safe for hours. The English Channel was the boundary between safety and war. As bombers crossed the coast, heading out over the water toward occupied Europe, tension increased noticeably. Men checked equipment, tested guns, tightened straps. The climb to operational altitude continued over the channel. Most missions required 20,000 to 27,000 feet for bomb run accuracy and to minimize flak effectiveness. The climb took time, fuel, and exposed the formations to fighter attack during the vulnerable ascent. Lieutenant Charles Cruikshank, navigator with the 351st Bomb Group, remembered, "Once you cross the coast, it's real. Radio silence except emergencies. Gunners scanning constantly. Everyone on oxygen. the formation tightening up because we're approaching fighter range. You look out and see hundreds of bombers in formation and you think, this is the most powerful air armada ever assembled. Then you remember we're about to fly through several hundred German fighters and thousands of flak guns. The German coast appeared as a dark line on the horizon. German radar had tracked the formation since takeoff. Fighter controllers were scrambling interceptors. Flak batteries were preparing. The Luftwaffe knew exactly where the bombers were heading and had positioned accordingly. The first test came at the coast, flak. German anti-aircraft batteries lined the occupied coastline, particularly around ports and industrial areas. The gunners had refined their skills on daily raids. They knew the altitudes, speeds, and formations. Staff Sergeant William Fleming, waist gunner with the 91st Bomb Group, described the first flak. You see black puffs appearing in the sky ahead, beautiful in a terrible way. Then you realize those are 88mm shells exploding, sending shrapnel in all directions. The formation flies straight through them because evasive action breaks formation. You just sit there, flying straight, while explosions bracket your aircraft. The sound is like hail on a tin roof. The aircraft shakes. You pray nothing hits anything critical. Once past the coastal defenses, the bomber stream was fully committed. Turning back now was impossible. The formations proceeded inland toward targets defended by the full might of German air defenses. The Luftwaffe fighter arm was the most experienced and skilled in the world. In 1943. Pilots who had survived Poland, France, Britain, and Russia were now dedicated to destroying American bombers. They developed tactics specifically to crack bomber formations and kill B-17s efficiently. The first attacks typically came from Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s from bases in occupied Europe. These were range-limited intercepts, the fighters having perhaps 20 minutes before fuel forced them to disengage. But 20 minutes was enough to cause tremendous damage. German pilots discovered the B-17's vulnerabilities through brutal trial and error. The chin turret was added to late-model B-17Gs, specifically because earlier versions were vulnerable to head-on attacks. Even with the chin turret, a skilled pilot attacking from 12 o'clock high with 20mm cannons and machine guns could destroy a bomber before defensive fire could kill him. Lieutenant William Lawley, who received the Medal of Honor for bringing his heavily damaged bomber home, described fighter attacks. They come in fast, usually from above and ahead. You see them as dots in the distance. Then suddenly they're on you, cannon and machine guns firing. The nose lights up with impacts. Plexiglass shatters. Men scream. The fighter flashes past in a split second. Then another comes, and another. They attack in waves, rotating through until they're out of ammunition or fuel. The defensive firepower of a B-17 was impressive on paper. 1350 caliber machine guns could theoretically create a protective zone of fire around the aircraft. But reality was more complex. Guns jammed from cold and vibration. Gunners struggled with bulky flight suits and gloves. Ammunition belts tangled, and German fighters attacked so fast that effective tracking was nearly impossible. Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions as a ball turret gunner on his first mission, described the chaos. Fighters everywhere, coming from all angles. You're trying to track them, lead them, fire in short bursts to prevent jamming. Empty brass is flying everywhere. The smell of gunpowder fills the aircraft. You hear impacts, shouting on the intercom, see bombers going down around you. It's total chaos, and you're just trying to survive the next 30 seconds. The Luftwaffe's most successful pilots developed extraordinary skill at bomber killing. They would position to attack from the sun, where they were hardest to see. They would coordinate attacks, with one flight drawing defensive fire while another attacked from a different angle. They would target damaged aircraft, stragglers who had lost the formation's protection. German fighters also developed specialized tactics for different attack angles. From head-on, they aimed for the cockpit, trying to kill the pilots. From above and behind, they targeted the wings where fuel tanks were located. From below, they aimed for the bomb bay, hoping to detonate bombs and ammunition. Technical Sergeant Archibald Mathias, who posthumously received the Medal of Honor, described a typical fighter attack during a mission to Berlin. Multiple fighters hit us simultaneously from different angles. The top turret gunner was firing continuously at attackers from above. The ball turret engaged fighters from below. Waist gunners were blazing away at beam attacks. The aircraft was shaking from gun recoil and impacts. Then our co-pilot was hit. Then the bombardier. Wounded men bleeding everywhere. And the fighters kept coming. Perhaps the most terrifying German tactic was the rocket attack. Pilots would stand off at 1,000 to 2,500 yards beyond effective defensive fire range and launch 21 cm rockets into bomber formations. A direct hit from one of these rockets would disintegrate a B-17. Even a near miss could cause catastrophic damage. The sight of a bomber going down was traumatic for other crews. Lieutenant John Wynant watched multiple aircraft destroyed during a mission to Schweinfurt. You see the hits. Fire breaks out. The bomber falls out of formation. You watch for parachutes. Sometimes you see them. Often you don't. That's 10 men gone. Maybe they're your friends. Maybe you played poker with them last night. Now they're gone. Just gone. And you fly on because there's nothing else you can do. If fighter attacks were terrifying, flak was soul-destroying. The German anti-aircraft network was the most sophisticated in the world. Major industrial targets were defended by hundreds of guns ranging from 88mm to 128mm, all radar-directed and fire-controlled. The 80mm flak 36 and its variants were the backbone of German air defense. Firing 15 to 20 rounds per minute, with shells that detonated at preset altitudes and spread shrapnel across a wide area, these weapons created barrages that appeared impenetrable. What made flak so psychologically damaging was the helplessness. Against fighters, you could shoot back, maneuver, fight. Against flak, you could only fly straight and level through the explosions, maintaining formation and course because the mission required it. Staff Sergeant Horace Brengel, waist gunner with the 100th Bomb Group, described approaching a heavily defended target. You see it from miles away. The sky over the target is filled with black bursts, so thick it looks solid. You're flying straight toward it at 150 miles per hour, no evasion, no escape. Every instinct screams to turn away, but you fly straight in because that's what you're trained to do. The sound of flak was distinctive, a sharp crack when close, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. The smell of cordite would fill the aircraft. Shrapnel would tear through aluminum like paper. Hot metal fragments would lodge in equipment, in structure, sometimes in men. The bomber stream would spread out as it approached the target, giving each aircraft room to bomb independently while maintaining mutual support. This made individual bombers more vulnerable, but improved bombing accuracy. German flak commanders understood this and adjusted their fire accordingly. Lieutenant Howard Snyder, bombardier, described the bomb run. The pilot turns control over to me. I'm flying the aircraft through the bomb site now, making tiny corrections. The flak is exploding all around. The aircraft is bouncing from near misses. I'm trying to ignore everything except the target in my sight. Then, bombs away. I feel the aircraft leap upward as 6,000 pounds drops. The pilot takes control and begins evasive action. We're through the worst, but we still have to fly out. The most dangerous moment was immediately after bombs away. Turning off the target, the formations were predictable. German gunners adjusted their fire to bracket the escape route. Many bombers survived the bomb run only to be destroyed escaping the target area. Technical Sergeant Raymond Knight, who received the Medal of Honor for continuing to pilot a damaged bomber after the pilots were killed, described post-target flak. We thought the worst was over. Bombs gone, turning for home. Then the flak intensified. A burst took out number 3 engine. Another hit the tail section. We were losing altitude, falling behind. That's when fighters found us. The B-17 was designed to absorb tremendous punishment, and combat proved this repeatedly. Bombers returned from missions with entire sections destroyed, engines shot out, control surfaces shredded. The rugged structure and redundant systems saved countless lives. But many aircraft didn't make it home. When a B-17 was catastrophically damaged, the crew faced impossible decisions in seconds. Bail out or try to save the aircraft? Help wounded crewmen or save yourself? The choices haunted survivors forever. Staff Sergeant Maynard Smith's Medal of Honor citation describes the kinds of damage crews faced. The aircraft was hit by incendiary bullets which penetrated the radio compartment, starting a fire. The radio operator was wounded, the waist gunner killed, and the aircraft filled with smoke. Smith extinguished the fire with his hands and continued fighting until the aircraft returned to base. The bailout procedure was theoretically simple. Attach chest pack parachute, move to exit, jump. Reality was chaos. Aircraft could be spinning, on fire, breaking apart. The intercom might be dead, making coordination impossible. Exits could be blocked by damaged or wounded men. And German fighters sometimes strafed parachuting crew members. Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal, one of the few pilots to survive both the Schweinfurt raids, described bailing out of a crippled bomber. The order came, abandon aircraft. I stayed at the controls trying to keep it level while the crew got out. The bombardier, navigator, and flight engineer bailed from the nose. Radio operator, gunners from the waist and tail. I counted them out. The co-pilot and I were last. The aircraft was in a dive. Controls were gone. We jumped at maybe 3,000 feet. The aircraft exploded seconds later. For wounded crew members, bailout was even more desperate. Men with severed limbs, abdominal wounds, or head trauma had to somehow make their way to exits, put on parachutes, and jump. Many couldn't manage it. Others were helped by crewmates who then didn't have time to escape themselves. The medical situation aboard damaged bombers was primitive. Each aircraft carried basic first aid supplies, but serious wounds required treatment beyond crew capabilities. Men bled to death from wounds that would have been survivable with proper care. Others died from shock, hypoxia when oxygen systems were damaged, or freezing when heating systems failed. Technical Sergeant William Pitzenbarger, an Air Force pararescue man whose story came later in Vietnam, described the wounded he saw from bomber crews. Gunshot wounds, shrapnel wounds, burns, frostbite, traumatic amputations, all sustained at 25,000 feet in freezing temperatures. Many men went into shock and couldn't be saved. The ones who survived to reach aid stations were incredibly tough. After escaping the target area, formations reassembled as best they could. Aircraft with battle damage struggled to maintain altitude and speed. Some fell behind, limping home alone or in small groups, easy prey for prowling fighters. The return flight tested crews and aircraft to their limits. Fuel was critical. Battle damage often meant fuel leaks. Extra weight from damaged structure and failed systems reduced range. Navigators recalculated routes to avoid known flak concentrations and fighter bases. Lieutenant Harry Crosby, navigator with the 100th Bomb Group, described the return navigation. You're trying to find the most direct route home while avoiding defenses. You're calculating fuel consumption against distance remaining. The aircraft is damaged, maybe flying slower than normal, consuming more fuel. You're watching that fuel gauge drop and praying you make it to the coast. Crew casualties complicated everything. If the pilot was killed or incapacitated, the co-pilot took over, often flying combat for the first time. If the navigator was hit, finding home became problematic. If multiple crew members were wounded, caring for them while fighting the aircraft home tested everyone. Some of the most incredible stories from the air war involved damaged bombers barely making it home. Aircraft landed with one or two engines out, with hydraulics failed, requiring manual gear extension, with massive structural damage that should have caused in-flight breakup. Lady Luck, a B-17 of the 401st Bomb Group, returned from a mission to Berlin on March 6, 1944, with her entire nose section shot away. The bombardier and navigator were killed instantly. The aircraft flew 400 miles home with wind screaming through the open nose, the pilots fighting controls that barely responded. Staff Sergeant John Foley, tail gunner on that mission, described it. The entire nose was gone, just gone. We could see straight through from the cockpit to open air. The pilots couldn't see ahead because of wind and debris. I crawled forward and guided them by intercom all the way back to England. We landed with no hydraulics, no brakes, just raw skill and luck. The English Channel meant salvation. Once across the water, crews could breathe slightly easier. Emergency landing fields along the coast received dozens of damaged bombers. Some aircraft barely cleared the cliffs before crash landing on the first available field. Technical Sergeant Kenneth Williams, flight engineer with the 452nd Bomb Group, remembered crossing the coast after a brutal mission. 2 engines out, hydraulics failing, wounded men aboard, fuel critically low. We could see the cliffs. We were going to make it. Men were crying, praying, thanking God. Then we started taking ground fire from German positions still holding out along the coast. Even that close to safety, we could still die. Landing a damaged B-17 required extraordinary skill and often luck. Battle damage affected controllability in unpredictable ways. Hydraulic failures meant manual gear extension and no flaps. Structural damage could cause control surface failures on landing, and many runways were fogged in, requiring instrument approaches with damaged or failed instruments. The standard procedure was firing flares to indicate casualties and damage. Red flares meant wounded aboard. Priority landing. Green meant aircraft was damaged but controllable. Multiple flares meant multiple problems. Control towers would watch dozens of bombers return, each with different levels of damage, different emergencies. Some aircraft had no radio communication. Others had engines failing on final approach. Coordinating the chaos while preventing collisions tested ground crews and pilots alike. Lieutenant Robert Morgan described landing Memphis Belle after the famous 25th mission. 3 engines running, 1 dead. Hydraulics damaged, requiring manual gear extension. Tail section riddled with holes. Control responses were mushy. We came in hot because we couldn't use full flaps. Touched down hard, but we were home. I shut down the engines, sat in that seat, and couldn't move. Couldn't believe we'd made it. Crash landings were common. Aircraft would ground loop on damaged landing gear, careening off runways. Some would lose control and cartwheel, breaking apart. Others would overshoot and crash into obstructions. Every landing was tense until the aircraft stopped and crew could evacuate. The ground crews would be waiting, ambulances standing by for wounded. Fire crews ready for aircraft leaking fuel, maintenance crews already assessing damage, calculating repair times. The machine had to keep operating. Staff Sergeant Robert Hughes, ground crew chief, described meeting returning aircraft. You'd count them back. Sometimes all came home. Often you'd count fewer than left. The ones that made it were often shot to pieces. You'd see the damage and wonder how they flew at all. Holes everywhere. Blood inside. Sometimes remains of crew members who didn't make it. You'd clean it up, patch it up, and prepare it for the next mission tomorrow. The statistics of the strategic bombing campaign were staggering. The 8th Air Force alone suffered 26,000 killed in action, 28,000 prisoners of war, and thousands more wounded. These casualties were concentrated among bomber crews. At the war's peak in 1943-44, crew survival rates were grim. Less than 25% of crews completed 25 missions during the worst periods. The odds improved with experience, better tactics, and long-range fighter escort, but they remained brutal. The 100th Bomb Group earned the nickname Bloody 100th after losing multiple aircraft on several missions. On October 10, 1943, during the second Schweinfurt raid, they lost 12 of 13 aircraft dispatched. That's 120 men, mostly killed or captured, in a single mission. The psychological impact on survivors was immense. They watched friends die repeatedly. They saw aircraft explode, spin down, crash. They survived through luck as much as skill. And they had to do it again the next day, and the next, until they completed 25 missions or died trying. Lieutenant John Wynant described the mental strain. After every mission, you'd go to the debriefing, then you'd check who made it back. Sometimes crews you were close with were just gone. You'd see their empty bunks that night. Someone would pack up their personal effects. Then tomorrow, new crews would move into those bunks and the cycle would continue. You couldn't afford to grieve. You had to keep functioning. Post-mission debriefing was intense. Intelligence officers questioned each crew member separately about what they saw. Fighter attacks, flak concentrations, bomb damage assessment, enemy tactics. The information helped plan future missions and adjust tactics. Afterward, crews were given a shot of whiskey, a tradition that helped dull the immediate shock. Then they'd return to barracks, write letters if they could, or just sit in silence processing what they'd experienced. Staff Sergeant Benjamin Warner, ball turret gunner with the 379th Bomb Group, described the post-mission routine. You'd shower, trying to wash off the smell of gunpowder and fear, change into clean clothes. Then maybe you'd write home, carefully saying nothing about what you actually did or saw because censors would cut it out anyway. You'd tell them you were fine, that everything was okay. You wouldn't mention that you watched 3 bombers go down today, that you nearly died 6 times, that you don't know if you can do it again tomorrow. You just say you're fine and you miss them.